Hi everyone, we are back with Chapter 4, talking about regulatory aspects of social, ethical, and regulatory aspects of advertising and promotion. So again, here we go. We're in the fourth section of the first part. Social aspects of advertising, ethical aspects of advertising, regulatory aspects of advertising, and regulation aspects of other promotional tools. So let's go. Okay, so there are a lot of pros and cons to advertising. Mostly pros, of course, but the social and ethical issues are really quite large. So we're just going to go through and talk about some of them. Advertising does educate consumer because advertising it informs people, but also people can find it to be superficial and intrusive. It does improve the standard of living for people, but this side of the effect is that it also can waste resources and put people into debt, to be quite frank. Okay, also general well-being, it really provides for a lot of our very basic human needs, and it reflects on what society's priorities are. So you can think about, as I was saying earlier in the previous chapter, that if you look at advertising, it really can be a chronicle of our cultural history. The con is, though, it creates needs that people might not already have, and too much materialism. Sorry. Maslow's need hierarchy. I'm not sure why that's not showing up, probably because I have this problem here, but we talked about this before. Maslow's need hierarchy, physiological safety, love and belonging and esteem, and also self-actualization. And advertisers respond to that, respond to those needs that we have and kind of almost take advantage of them. So there again, this is like the pro and the con. Is it demeaning and deceitful and take advantage of people, or is it something that's very liberating and artful for people? So advertisers are beginning to show more sensitivity towards people. It can be a source of liberation for people and freedom to see the products that they need. And it is a democratic art in that all people are everyone's able to advertise their product. The con is that sometimes advertising can be really offensive and promote stereotypes, and there might be some deception and through subliminal advertising. So let's take a look at a couple examples. So, excuse me, social aspects of advertising. McDonald's is very artful ad right there with the coffee cup and the coming out. Looks like a street lamp to inspire the imagination. Also looking at it in terms of reminding us that we're hungry, that, locked in this cage and we have this hunger. Coming up, looking at a transit example, you see sides of buses. It can, things can be very beautiful. Addressing stereotypes of women, that the Dove ad campaign that they did a few years ago, that, we have this ideal version of a woman, but very few women live up to that. Also looking at diversity, Wells Fargo, two different couples, two same-sex couples, two different same-sex couples. And again here, Tiffany's same-sex couple with getting engaged. And then also more diversity with, showing an Asian couple eating at McDonald's. Okay, so more social aspects of advertising. It does have a powerful effect on mass media. When we talk about mass media, again, it's newspapers, television, radio, and online platforms. It does offer an opportunity for some diversity and affordability in mass media, but it also can affect programming in terms of what we see on television, that kind of thing. Okay, more ethical aspects. Ethics, to remind you all, again, is the difference the difference between right and wrong, good and evil. So moral principles against which behavior is judged. So what our ethics in our country, our culture may be different than ethics in another country. So just bear that in mind that in this class, we're just specifically talking about the United States. And they often can, we look at legal considerations, we're going to talk more about them. And a lot of times, whether something is considered ethical or unethical is really just a personal judgment. All right, so the other part about ethical aspects of an advertising are deception. Deception is making false or misleading claims. Puffery is using superlatives, and the best, the most, the largest, that kind of thing. So people will believe what they hear. Puffery is not necessary. It's considered legal. It's not necessarily considered ethical. If you took Business Law 1, you talk about puffery in Business Law 1. So appeal of the free gift, that the idea that it gets people in to buy things that they really don't need. And also emotional appeals are not illegal or unethical. It is really just a method of communicating and connecting with customers. Okay, so advertising to children is also something that is, a lot of people are concerned about. You watch the Saturday morning cartoons or any of the children-focused cable stations, and you'll see a lot of ads for games and toys and things like that, that people are concerned that it promotes too much superficiality among children, and that people it instills values of material goods and consumption in children. So also it can create a conflict between parent and child. I want, and the parent doesn't want it, can't afford to get it for the child, or also don't want that for their child. It's not part of their parenting plan. But there is a Children's Television Act that restricts advertising on children's programming to be keeps it as ethical and as responsible as possible. So some arguments in favor are that children do understand what advertising is, and that early on that they have become skeptical. They become a little leery of some of the ads. That may be true for some, maybe not all. But it depends upon the child and the ad itself and their home and that kind of thing. But generally speaking, it is believed that children are wise to what they're being told. Okay, more ethical issues. So in advertising, the big one is tobacco, alcohol, gambling, lotteries, firearms. This can promote socially unacceptable behavior and unhealthy behavior, and that they target adolescents. But again, they believe that children do believe that the products are intended as an adult product, and they should be wise to that, and that advertising might not necessarily create the demand, that it's a variety of different things that will go into demand. Okay, more ethical aspects of advertising. As I said, there are many. So it's the idea that you can create this demand for a brand, but it can't happen without things from the macro environment. Again, things we talked about in the first section of marketing and marketing 1. Social and cultural trends, they can't really necessarily be held responsible for that. They reflect that. Changes in economic conditions, technological change, that advertising just reacts to these things. And there's really complex issues, and it's more apparent in more controversial products. Okay, so regulatory aspects of advertising. We're going to talk a lot about that. The government has come in and regulated quite a few products and quite a few also advertising messages. That is something that's coming from all factors, all publics, so to speak, concept that we talked about, part of the microenvironment, that consumers and industry organizations, government bodies that regulate advertising to help restrict the process. And we see that in areas of deception, competition, advertising to children. We've already talked about that a little bit. We're going to talk about a variety of different organizations. So, Federal Trade Commission regulates against deception. and misleading the consumer. It's an important piece of regulation. Unfair advertising, acts or practices that cause substantial injury to consumers that you can't reasonably avoid, and it's not outweighed by the benefits to the consumer. So, dangerous products, certain types of equipment, and that kind of thing. Motor vehicles, certain types of motor vehicles, that kind of thing. Okay, competitive advertising, in terms of, so competitive issues in regulating advertising, is that vertical cooperation advertising, that the manufacturer and the dealer would share the expense. So, for example, Ford and your local Ford dealer. Comparison advertiser makes a comparison between the firm's brand and the competitor's brand. We see that with, the Mac and with Apple and the Microsoft, or you see it with phone ads. You see it with the cable ads so much. So the thing is that we don't. What we want to avoid is any kind of monopoly behavior. Also, advertising to children is also something that is regulated. It's Children's Television Act, Children's Advertising Review Unit, Online Privacy Protection. We talked about the rise of children's television programming in the late 60s and early 70s, and in reaction to that, the advertisers jumped on that opportunity, and then, the public said, pulled back on that and said, no, you have to be more prudent in that area. Okay, so there are a variety of the different things that the Federal Trade Commission does that we want to make sure that advertisers make supporting evidence for claims that are, so that people, they can back up what they're saying. And if an advertiser is given a cease and desist order, that they stop advertising. And so there has to be, if they're accused of unfair or deceptive practices, they agrees to stop the advertisement without necessarily admitting it. And then cease and desist order requires that the advertising question be stopped within 30 days to determine if it's actually deceptive or unfair. Okay, affirmative disclosure. It's important material that's absent from prior ads must be included in subsequent ads. Harmed, particular if there's harm, the product causes any kind of harm, and there has to be corrective advertising to redirect what has been, to reinform people and tell them that it's been misleading. And there are also definite rules for celebrity endorsements, testimonials, bloggers, that kind of thing. You can't use someone as a testimony. You can't use a celebrity or an opinion leader without their permission. Okay, now then there's also state regulation. Generally speaking, there's really not a lot of policing powers over firms. It's more national regulation. And violation or fair practice is, as I said, is a federal government issue. The Attorney General's office in each state, though, is responsible for investigating questionable promotional practices, and people can report things to the Attorney General, and then there's the National Association of Attorneys General that monitors activity and reports its findings to its colleagues. Now, there's also industry self-regulation, and that is what the marketing and advertising industry promoting themselves. We talked about the American Marketing Association in the previous, in the ethical rules. This is from the book, and you can look at it more closely. There's the National Advertising Review Board and the National Advertising Division. The National Advertising Review Board reviews activities, again, self-regulating, not only the National Advertising Division, but also children's advertising. So, National Advertising Review Board establishes the policies and procedures for advertising industry self-regulation, and things from the Better Business Bureau are forwarded to the National Advertising Division, and then the National Advertising Review Board looks at it. And then there's state and local divisions of that as well. Okay, so here we go. There's also the American Association of Advertising Agencies. They don't really have legal binding power over their members, but they can apply pressure, and they provide guidelines. And you want to earn the respect of your peers, so that's sort of what they're counting on there. Okay, media organizations evaluate what's appropriate for broadcast. National Association of Broadcasters, Direct Marketing Association, again, this idea of self-regulators, and try to keep their members in check. Okay, and then there's also internet self-regulation. The Digital Advertising Alliance, Center for Digital Democracy, focuses on research and things like that. It's important for social media companies and any kind of digital advertising. There's so much opportunity for all sorts of misdeeds, but hopefully we will keep each other accountable. Okay, and then there's also consumers as regulatory agencies. Again, the consumerism is this idea of looking out for the needs of the consumers, the safety and needs of consumers, and people want a greater voice in the safety of their products, and particularly food and drug pharmaceutical products, and furniture and cars and all those different things. And that was a movement that grew a lot in the 60s and 70s. So there's also this idea that there's regulatory issues in direct marketing, behavioral targeting, database development, this idea that you track markers and people's devices, and that you track people's online behavior. The idea of GPS devices embedded in smartphones, these are big issues now that become more in the forefront. So this is something even as we speak we're trying to work through. Spam, unsolicited commercial messages sent through email. Again, if you in Business Law 1 you talk about that as well. The idea that you can't send out a certain number of emails from the same unsolicited emails from the same address. Phishing is trying to get people to click on something and share their information. Contests, sweepstakes, and coupons, taking unfair advantage of people. Telemarketing is also a big issue, that there's a lot of consumer fraud. The Consumer Fraud and Abuse Prevention Act and the Do Not Call law, that people are being taken advantage of over the telephone, unsuspecting people, giving money to people who they may or may not know. Then, so this idea that you put out these coupons to try to lure people in, that kind of thing. Is that the best way to do business? Also, premiums. It's the idea that you have an item offered, you get a glass, you get a mug, you get a pen or a hat or whatever, or a special bag. So is that something that, when is that too much, that you're, asking people to buy something and they really are not, that perhaps isn't the best product? So there's a Robinson-Patman Act that the idea that you offer all customers similar prices and similar products and quantities, that not one group isn't being taken advantage of over another. Then contests and sweepstakes, making sure the prize that's offered is actually the value. What is the value of the prize that's offered? Is it what they're telling you? Any kind of complete condition, like complete disclosure of any conditions that are required. Conditions necessary to obtain a prize. Do you need to be there? Do you need to have, do a certain thing? And also that it's a sweepstakes and not a lottery, and that it's not classified as a lottery. And this whole idea of product and brand placement is also an issue. That are we in terms of associating certain brands with certain activities. Okay, so there's also this idea, there's also with public relations. Public relations is advertising's close cousin, and with public relations, using photographs that you don't have permission to use, or copyright infringement, using any kind of piece of artwork or music or anything else in your advertising that's someone else has created and you don't have the permission to use. You're violating intellectual property laws. And then finally, defamation, damaging someone's reputation because the communication wasn't true. And slander, again, these are things we talk about in Business Law 1. Slander is when you say something wrong about someone, or libel is when you put something in print. And again, if there's something that's in advertising, then you can be held accountable for that. Okay, so there we are, Chapter 4.